of, I don't know, a brand new luxury car on a piece of prime downtown commercial real estate.
Right, just a massive upfront capital investment.
Exactly. You get the deed, you walk up to your massive new building, and you realize you don't even have the keys to unlock the front door.
Yeah, the doors are just bolted shut.
Bolted shut. Not only that, the city tells you that before you can even step foot inside, you have to spend the next 3 weeks manually arranging virtual furniture in a completely unrelated studio apartment.
It sounds absurd when you put it like that. But
It's wild.
yeah.
But today, for you listening, we are stepping into an environment where that exact scenario plays out every single day. We are doing a deep dive into the unforgiving, hyper-optimized, high-stakes economy of a blockchain game called Main City.
And, it is an ecosystem that absolutely punishes the uninformed. We are looking at a landscape where the mechanics of traditional video gaming have been, well, entirely replaced by cutthroat digital finance.
Right, this isn't about hand-eye coordination at all.
Not even a little bit. It is about predictive market modeling, extreme risk tolerance, and a fundamental understanding of how to manipulate decentralized economies.
So if you're tuning in, consider this deep dive a masterclass in digital survival. We're pulling apart a massive broadcast from Main City Radio. Specifically, we're looking at their breakdown of a recent high-level tournament called the Bunny Hop Blitz, alongside an exclusive developer diary.
Which is packed with data, by the way.
Oh, it's dense. Our mission today isn't just to recap who won a video game. We're going to unpack the terrifying math, the psychological warfare, and the literal sleep deprivation tactics required to dominate at the absolute top tier of this economy.
Yeah, the time commitment alone is staggering.
It's essentially like trying to run a Fortune 500 company while playing three-dimensional chess against hundreds of other people, all of whom, by the way, are actively trying to bankrupt you.
And the margin for error is effectively zero. I mean, to really grasp how this economy functions under that kind of immense pressure, we have to start by looking at the battlefield itself.
The tournament arena.
Exactly. The Bunny Hop Blitz was a week-long, highly competitive tournament event within Main City, and the leaderboard from this event is incredibly revealing. You have a player operating under the handle FFTB Hacker taking the #1 spot,
Who we will be talking about a lot today.
oh, extensively. Then you have someone named Darklow taking rank 2, and a player going by Duel, or I think sometimes they go by Diesel securing rank 3.
But, the names are almost secondary to the sheer velocity of the capital exchange right at the starting gun.
Yeah.
Like when this tournament kicked off, the volume of money flying across the screen was just staggering.
Oh, the day one spending is always aggressive.
Aggressive is an understatement. You have these mid-tier competitive players, including the broadcasters themselves, actually executing massive early game purchases. One player immediately went out and bought a Prestige 6 museum for over 200,000 vouchers.
Which requires immediate real-world context for anyone listening who isn't deeply embedded in this specific ecosystem. Vouchers are the primary in-game currency used for high-level transactions.
Right, but they aren't monopoly money.
Exactly. They are not monopoly money. They translate directly to a real-world cryptocurrency called CRO, which is the native token of the Kronos blockchain.
So when someone drops 200,000 vouchers in the opening hours of a tournament, I mean, what does that actually represent in terms of their commitment?
It represents an enormous immediate risk of capital. They are basically flooding the zone with liquidity. I mean, another player in this exact same starting window purchased a level 451 Motors business directly from the eventual tournament winner, FFTB Hacker.
Just to guarantee an explosive start to their point generation, right?
Exactly. They wanted that early lead.
Hold on, though, because that sounds like a classic digital real estate trap.
Yeah.
Are these players just overpaying for these early assets out of pure FOMO?
Well, it's
Because if I'm looking at a week-long tournament, blowing my entire budget on hour one feels like buying a Thanksgiving turkey on Wednesday for 5 times the price, just because I'm terrified the grocery store will run out. Does spending that kind of capital up front actually cannibalize their profit margins for the rest of the week?
It's a calculated gamble, actually. It's based entirely on the game's multiplier mechanics. In Main City, your passive income, so the points you generate just by existing in the game, is directly tied to your live rank on the global leaderboard.
No, so it's not a flat rate.
No, not at all. The higher your rank, the higher your percentage multiplier. So by overpaying for that level 451 Motors business on day one, that player instantly rocketed to a top 10 live rank.
Ah, So they aren't just buying a building, they're basically buying an interest rate.
Exactly. That early position gave them a massive passive point multiplier. They got an engine that, because of the math of the game, essentially ran on its own momentum for the rest of the week.
They could just coast.
Yeah, they coast on that early investment while other players scramble to catch up manually.
That makes sense in theory, but, and we have to talk about this, there is a massive trap here that genuinely made me laugh out loud when I saw how many people fall into it. It brings us back to my opening analogy about buying the luxury building and not having the keys.
Oh, the mansion grind.
Yes. The disconnect between prestige and avatar levels.
This is the ultimate filter for new players entering the main city ecosystem. It is, quite literally, where raw capital goes to die if it isn't paired with actual labor.
Walk me through the mechanics of this, because the psychology of it is so wild to me. A player gets excited.
Yeah.
They see the tournament starting. They go to the marketplace. They drop a fortune on a high-prestige business like that Prestige 6 museum.
Right.
They place it in their city. They sit back waiting for the points to just rain down, and the system gives them absolutely nothing. Zero bonuses.
Because the business's prestige level is only half of the required equation, the game enforces a strict dependency on player activity. You, the player who is represented by your in-game avatar, must meet specific level requirements to actually unlock the mathematical potential of the businesses you own.
You cannot simply be a passive landlord.
Exactly. You can't just buy your way in and walk away.
And how do you level up that avatar? Because, you would think it involves doing business deals or trading stocks, given the whole commercial theme of the game.
You would think so, but not at all. You increase your avatar level by returning to your digital mansion and performing incredibly repetitive manual tasks.
It's so funny.
You literally have to craft virtual furniture, and then you have to place that furniture in specific configurations. You have to continually upgrade your personal living space through sheer time-consuming repetition.
It is mind-numbing. You are essentially acting as an interior decorator for days on end just to appease the bureaucracy of the game, so it will finally let you turn a profit on your multi-million-dollar commercial real estate.
That's a perfect way to put it.
If you don't do that foundational work, that shiny new Prestige 6 business is just a very expensive, totally useless paperweight.
It forces engagement. The developers designed it so you cannot just buy your way to the top instantly. You have to bleed time into the system as well. And, despite these complex interlocking risks, the underlying economy is surprisingly viable if a player has extreme discipline.
Yeah, we have hard data on this from the mid-tier players who broadcasted their tournament experience.
Right. Let's look at the financial breakdown for the guy who executed that massive early spend strategy. I think you assumed he dug himself into a hole he couldn't get out of, right?
Oh, completely. I thought he was financially ruined for the week.
Actually, he meticulously tracked his ledger. He spent heavily on day one, got outbid repeatedly during the middle of the week, but then he pivoted. Instead of trying to hold his initial assets, he transitioned into building mid-tier businesses and selling them off right at the end of the tournament.
To other desperate players trying to secure last-minute points.
Exactly.
So he became a supplier when the gold rush started drying up. Did he actually turn a profit?
He did. He ended up net positive by exactly 198.61 vouchers entirely through market trading, completely covering his massive initial investment.
Wow.
And that was before the tournament prize pool was even distributed. By securing a rank inside the top 50, he earned an additional payout of 1.62 million vouchers.
Which translates to 1,620 CRO. And just to ground this for you listening, depending on the market fluctuations of crypto at any given time, that is a highly significant return for a single week of digital real estate trading.
It proves the system works for the savvy middle class of the game.
But to truly understand the absolute ceiling of this economy, we have to leave the mid-tier behind. We have to look at the apex predator of the bunny hop blitz.
The reigning champion. FFTB hacker.
The player who dominated the entire event. The broadcast managed to secure an exclusive Q&A with him, and honestly, stripping away the mythology of the leaderboard to see the methodology underneath is fascinating.
It really is.
But before we get to his terrifying spreadsheets, and they are terrifying, who is the actual human being operating this digital empire?
So he is an original First Frontier land minter, meaning he was embedded in the absolute genesis of this game's ecosystem. He acquired foundational assets before the economy even fully launched.
But he wasn't always a hardcore competitor, right?
Yeah, no, he didn't start treating the game as a competitive, high-stakes enterprise until about a year and a half ago.
And the personal details they extracted from him are so deceptively normal, it almost feels like camouflage.
Yeah.
Like When asked about his interests outside of dominating digital economies, he says he loves the movie The Matrix.
Which is almost too on the nose, considering he basically sees the underlying code of this game.
Exactly. He likes to play frisbee, he goes hiking, and my absolute favorite detail, he claims he doesn't even have a favorite genre of music.
Yeah.
When he's executing these millions of dollars equivalent trades, he's just listening to whatever top 40 pop radio station his wife or kids happen to have playing in the background.
It is a striking psychological profile. You have a player executing some of the most complex, high-risk digital trading strategies imaginable, operating with ice-cold precision, and his environment is completely casual.
It's wild.
But that casual demeanor vanishes entirely when you examine his core operational strategy. He is obsessively, unilaterally focused on one specific game mechanic above all else: quality.
Okay, let's dive into the mechanics here. Because quality in Main City isn't just a subjective descriptor for a good business. It is a hard, mathematically brutal game mechanic.
Very brutal.
He specifically targets the highest tier businesses in the game. The rare, epic, or legendary assets like the banks, the museums, and a highly coveted asset called the Felice. And his entire goal is to push these specific buildings to quality 5 or quality 6.
And to understand the sheer gravity of this strategy, we have to explain how the game handles asset upgrading. In order to increase a business's quality level, you cannot just pay a flat fee. You have to engage an emerging system.
Right.
You take multiple identical businesses, you pay an exorbitant fee in the game's secondary currency, which are called diamonds, and you attempt to fuse them together.
The key word there being attempt. This is where the game turns into a psychological meat grinder.
Precisely. High-level merging is not guaranteed. It relies entirely on a random number generator. The higher the quality level you're attempting to reach, the higher the failure rate.
Let's look at the actual numbers he provided, because my jaw hit the floor. To even attempt to merge a business to quality 6, clicking the button for that single attempt costs 48 million diamonds.
Yep.
But that's just the clicking fee. To physically build up the raw materials, the lower level business is required to even reach the point where you can make that attempt. You've already sunk a foundational base cost of 240 million diamonds.
And if the random number generator rolls against you when you click that button?
It all vanishes. 240 million diamonds. The 48 million diamond fee. Gone in a fraction of a second.
Just wipe out.
To try again, you can't just pay a late fee. You have to start completely from scratch, rebuild the lower tiers, farm another massive stockpile of diamonds, and face the exact same failure rate all over again.
And this is the dividing line between the number one player and the rest of the highly competitive field. Average players look at a 240 million diamond catastrophic failure as a devastating loss.
Because it is.
Well, sure. They anticipate the failure, they brace for it, and when it happens, they suffer severe morale drops. They step away from the keyboard, they play defensively for the rest of the week just to recover.
Which is the normal human reaction. Burning that much digital capital is like launching a multi-million-dollar space rocket, watching it explode on the launch pad, and then having to sweep up the ashes yourself.
But FFTB Hacker does not view it as an explosion. He views it as a calculated manufacturing expense. He has already factored a specific percentage of catastrophic digital failure into his baseline operating costs.
He just bakes it into the spreadsheet.
Exactly. He treats burning 250 million diamonds as just another necessary, unavoidable step in the friction of his supply chain. His risk tolerance isn't just high, it's mathematically decoupled from emotion entirely.
And you see that exact same emotionless precision in how he handles leveling up his assets. He doesn't just max out a business blindly. He pushes his high-quality banks and museums to highly specific, seemingly arbitrary levels, usually stopping exactly between level 300 and level 420. And he does this because he is running proprietary Excel spreadsheets alongside the game that calculate the exact diminishing returns of income bonuses against the maximum level caps of his total asset portfolio.
Which introduces a fascinating mechanical quirk about the game's interface. The UI offers players different efficiency buttons for leveling up their businesses. You can click a button to level up an asset 1 time, 10 times, 100 times, or simply hit a max button to dump all your resources in at once.
Now, naturally, if you were managing hundreds of businesses, you would just hit the 100x button to save time, right?
You would think so, but for his primary wealth-generating assets, he meticulously manually uses the 1x click, hundreds of times in a row.
Why on earth would he subject himself to that kind of carpal tunnel? I mean, does clicking it one by one actually change the outcome?
In the architecture of many of these complex blockchain simulations, it absolutely does. When you hit the 100x button, the game's internal server often rolls its random number generator once for the entire batch to determine secondary critical success chances.
Wait, so just one roll for the whole batch?
Yes. These are often called procs or microbonuses. If you roll poorly on that one attempt, the entire batch of 100 levels suffers.
Oh, wow. So it's a massive variance risk.
Exactly. It's a huge gamble. But if you sit there and manually click the 1x button 100 individual times, you force the server to execute 100 independent mathematical rolls.
That makes sense.
Over a large enough sample size, this mathematically smooths out the variance, virtually guaranteeing that his high-tier assets hit the exact statistical average of secondary bonuses that he modeled in his spreadsheets.
He is literally manually clicking to outmath the server's probability distribution.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, he doesn't do this for everything. The broadcast noted that for his secondary low-impact businesses, there is a specific type called Cool Cats. He just mashes the 100x button without a second thought.
Because the Cool Cats serve an entirely different structural purpose. They are not engines of wealth. They are bureaucratic placeholders.
Right. They are just garbage in his grand design. He only levels them up to satisfy arbitrary prestige requirements that the game forces on him so he can keep his main banks and museums running at full capacity.
He doesn't care about the variance there.
Not at all. He couldn't care less about optimizing their microbonuses. He just needs the paperwork filed, so to speak.
It is a brilliant dual-track methodology. He applies hyper-focused, agonizingly slow micromanagement for the assets that compound tree wealth and utilizes broad brute force automation for the assets that only exist to satisfy the system's structural rules.
So this paints a really clear picture of the what. We know what he is doing. He is ruthlessly building these god-tier quality 6 businesses and leveling them with terrifying precision. But the glaring question for anyone listening is the how.
The funding.
Yes, how is he funding a strategy that routinely burns hundreds of millions of diamonds on failed attempts? And this brings us to the advanced tokenomics. This is where the game theory comes into play.
The financial engine driving this strategy relies on an immense structural advantage. When examining the data, the broadcasters identified what we can call the diamond generation gap.
Let's break this gap down because the numbers are staggering.
When a new tournament begins, a highly competitive mid-tier player enters the arena with their baseline city assets generating roughly 30 to 42 million diamonds passively over a set period.
Okay.
FFTB Hacker, however, enters that exact same tournament, automatically generating between 50 and 60 million diamonds.
50 million versus 30 million sounds like a big head start. But in an economy where a single click costs 48 million, does that early passive gap actually dictate the winner? Couldn't a smart trader simply outmaneuver him on the marketplace to close that gap?
If passive generation were the only factor, perhaps, but FFTB Hacker doesn't just sit on his passive income. He uses a deeply buried mechanical exploit regarding the game's conversion rates to artificially multiply his purchasing power.
This is the crazy part.
We can refer to this as the aerial bombardment hack.
This is the part of the deep dive where you realize the top players are playing an entirely different video game than everyone else. Walk me through the mechanics of this hack step by step. How does he manipulate the exchange rate?
Right, so in Main City, players can purchase diamonds directly from the game using their vouchers. However, the conversion rate between vouchers and diamonds is not static.
Oh, so it fluctuates.
Exactly.
Ah.
The game's code dynamically scales how many diamonds you get per voucher based on your current active attack bonus.
Which is meant to be a minor perk for engaging in player versus player combat, right?
Intended, yes. But exploited, it becomes a financial weapon. At the exact moment a competition starts, FFTB Hacker ignores the marketplace entirely. Instead, he spends hours systematically executing 14 to 15 specific aerial bombardment attacks against other players' cities.
Just relentlessly hammering the server with offensive maneuvers.
Relentlessly. And because these attack bonuses stack, he creates an artificial temporary spike in his multiplier. He pushes his global attack bonus to a staggering 140 to 150%.
And then, and this is the kicker, only while that massive temporary 150% multiplier is active on his account, he goes to the digital bank and converts his vouchers into diamonds.
Exactly. The system looks at his multiplier and effectively sells him an ocean of currency at a 150% discount compared to what the mid-tier players are paying.
It is the weaponization of tokenomics. He transforms his 50 million baseline advantage into an immediate, overwhelming war chest of 120 million diamonds or more for the exact same real-world capital cost it takes an uninformed player to acquire half that amount. He is legally counterfeiting currency through game mechanics.
It's brilliant, but it requires absolute discipline because the broadcast asked him a very revealing question. Do you buy diamonds like this in normal mode?
Right. And for context for you listening, normal mode is the everyday, ongoing baseline version of the game that runs outside of these high-stakes weekly tournaments.
And his answer to that was an unequivocal no. He strictly budgets his voucher conversions purely for competitive tournament events. In normal mode, he refuses to spend currency on consumable, burnable items like diamonds.
So what does he buy?
Instead, he funnels every ounce of his baseline profit into permanent, non-depreciating assets. He buys NFTs, specialized tools, avatars, and digital land.
But wait, this brings up a contradiction. Because the data shows that he recently engaged in a brutal, exhausting war of attrition to take the rank 1 spot on the normal mode leaderboard.
Yes, he did.
He spent weeks grinding to dethrone a player named Meta who had held that spot for over a year. If he refuses to spend money on diamonds in normal mode, why burn himself out pushing for that specific crown? Was it just an ego play?
In high-stakes crypto gaming, ego is always secondary to yield. He pursued rank 1 in normal mode entirely as a calculated business acquisition. Holding the #1 spot on the permanent leaderboard grants the owner an unshakable passive 10% bonus on all cash generation, diamond generation, and furniture experience points.
Oh, the furniture experience again, helping him bypass that miserable mansion grind faster.
Precisely. But the critical piece of the puzzle is that this 10% normal mode bonus carries over into the high-stakes tournament servers.
Oh, well.
He didn't care about dethroning Meta for bragging rights. He wanted to secure a permanent 10% interest rate hike on his digital bank account to leverage in the arenas where the real money is made.
It's a terrifying level of long-term planning. But let's move to how he actually interacts with the rest of the player base during a tournament, because his market manipulation tactics genuinely broke my brain.
The selling strategy.
Yes, we talked earlier about mid-tier players blindly spending 200,000 vouchers on day 1 to buy high-level businesses. It turns out they're buying them directly from FFTB Hacker.
This is the engine of his liquidity. He enters a competition with a massive pre-calculated voucher budget. He intentionally overspends in the opening hours, sweeping the marketplace to secure exactly the raw foundational assets he needs to begin his high-level merging process.
Okay, so he monopolizes the raw materials. But then he takes those materials, he builds these high-quality assets, the quality 5s, the ones that cost a fortune to attempt, and he turns around and lists them back on the marketplace.
He does.
He specifically sells them to other players at a couple of prestige levels below his own current progression. I have to stop and ask,
Right.
why? Isn't he literally arming his own enemies?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Completely. If I am in a race for first place, I am not selling my spare Ferrari engine to the guy currently in second place, even if he offers to cover my entry fee.
You have to view it through the lens of cash flow. Remember the failure rate we discussed?
Yeah.
Burning 240 million diamonds on a whim requires a constant aggressive injection of fresh capital.
Right.
By manufacturing these quality 5 businesses and selling them just a few levels below his own apex, he guarantees they will be irresistibly desirable to the mid-tier players desperately trying to catch up.
Oh, I see. The mid-tier guys look at the market, they see a massive shortcut that saves them from the nightmare of the merging RNG, and they just pounce on it.
Exactly. They drain their own treasuries to buy his cast-offs. But because FFTB Hacker ensures these sold assets are always a mathematical step behind his own proprietary progression, they are never quite powerful enough for the buyer to actually overtake him on the leaderboard.
He has created a closed-loop digital manufacturing plant. He builds premium, slightly obsolete weapons and sells them to his closest rivals at a massive markup. Their capital funds his next wave of bleeding-edge, high-risk merges, while simultaneously depleting their ability to fight him. He is a digital arms dealer.
It is the perfect monopoly. He controls the supply of the tools needed to defeat him, ensuring the price is always exactly high enough to keep his opponents in a perpetual state of financial recovery.
But even with all these brilliant machinations, his ultimate advice to new players who want to emulate this strategy is a harsh reality check. He states explicitly, money alone will not save you.
Capital is useless without compliance to the game's chronobiology. The main city ecosystem demands a physical toll. The game's code dictates that passive income generation requires manual collection at strict 8-hour intervals.
8 hours.
Yes. If you hit that offline collection window, the vault locks. Production completely halts until you physically log in and click the button.
Think about the real-world implications of that. Imagine setting your alarm for 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, not because you have an early flight, but because if you don't wake up, open your laptop, and click a button in your virtual city, your profit margins for the entire week collapse.
It's grueling.
You literally have to design your real-world sleep schedule, your family time, your entire life around these unyielding digital collection windows.
It is the ultimate intersection of deep mathematical planning, heavy capital investment, and absolutely flawless time management. The dedication required is immense, which forces us to look one layer deeper into this economy.
What do you mean?
Well, we understand the math, the merges, and the sleep deprivation, but what are the underlying foundational assets that make all this math possible? What is the physical or digital gear generating these millions of diamonds?
Right. We have to talk about the NFTs, the non-fungible tokens, because this is where the raw data intersects with digital aesthetics and specialized utility. Without owning these specific digital items, all the spreadsheet math in the world is utterly useless.
The data on this is unequivocal. When pressed on his strategy, FFTB hacker stated that the single most critical assets for a competitive player to acquire are weapon and armor NFTs.
And the mathematical limits of the game prove why. If you try to play Main City without owning a weapon NFT, your ability to generate attack boosts, the very boosts needed for the aerial bombardment hack we just discussed, hits a hard algorithmic ceiling at roughly 60%.
You are essentially kneecapped.
It's totally kneecapped. But if you hold the right specialized weapon NFTs in your wallet, you unlock the ability to target specific malware nodes on the game map.
And targeting those malware nodes allows players to bypass the standard limits entirely, achieving astronomical multipliers. We are talking about scaling from a 60% boost into the thousands of percent.
It is night and day, and you desperately need the corresponding armor NFTs to defend your own city against those same attacks. Otherwise, you get hit by what the community calls a malware maelstrom.
Which effectively wipes out your production efficiency.
Yeah, it just tanks it.
These tokens are not just cosmetic profile pictures. They are the fundamental load-bearing gears of the in-game war machine. And because their utility is so vital, it drives intense speculative demand for specific NFT collections that ultimately dictate the culture and the power dynamics of the entire player base.
The broadcasters spent a lot of time analyzing the heavy hitter collections that define the meta. You have the Dark Lions, which are incredibly prized, purely because they inject massive raw mathematical attack power into your loadout.
Very high utility.
Then you have the classic Loaded Lions, which act as a foundational status symbol. There's a deeply weird collection called the Crazy Monsters. And just to highlight the level of hoarding at the top tier, one of the hosts casually mentioned on air that he personally owns 80 of them.
80. Which represents an immense centralization of utility. You also have specialized groups like the Cretan monks. But alongside this rigid mathematical utility, there is a secondary market entirely driven by pure, unadulterated digital flexing.
Well, flexing is incredible. My favorite example from the broadcast was the Jack and Jill collection. One of the hosts was nearly hyperventilating with joy because he managed to snipe a highly specific Jack and Jill avatar off the secondary market for slightly under its original mint price, which was about $40.
And what made this specific avatar so desirable?
It was completely invisible.
What?
Yes, it was a transparent rendering error that became canonized as a rare trait. He was ecstatic about the prospect of running around the high-stakes metaverse as a completely nude, invisible ghost.
That is hilarious.
It provided absolute zero tactical advantage, but the aesthetic novelty made it highly coveted. And that brings us to the most contentious debate in the main city economy: the market for cosmetic skins.
Skins, which are aesthetic overlays that change the visual appearance of your businesses, are offered at truly exorbitant prices. And they introduce a fascinating study in perceived value versus actual return on investment.
Let's look at the pricing tiers the sources highlighted, because I genuinely struggle to justify the math here.
Mm-hmm.
You have a skin called the Wolf Swap Bank that provides a flat 4.5% bonus to your production.
Okay, that's decent.
Then you have the Synthopia Space Power Vault, which is a skin for the Cineplex business. It visually transforms the building into a futuristic moon base with a giant holographic whale swimming inside it.
And the cost for that specific aesthetic upgrade?
75,000 vouchers.
Wow.
Tens of thousands of dollars in real crypto value, just so your digital movie theater looks like a space aquarium.
Yeah.
And then there is the Meta's CFO Leo skin, which costs a fortune but only provides a meager 2% bonus. So I have to ask you, as someone who understands the microeconomics of this, from a pure ROI perspective, is a 2% boost really worth dropping the equivalent of a down payment on a house?
To a rational outside observer, absolutely not. It operates as a digital Veblen good.
A Veblen good.
Yeah, it's an economic concept describing a luxury item where the demand actually increases as the price goes up, specifically because its exorbitant cost makes it a status symbol.
Okay.
It is the digital equivalent of a Rolex watch. A Rolex tells the exact same time as a $5 digital watch from a gas station. You do not buy it for the utility of knowing the time. You buy it so that everyone in the boardroom, or in this case on the global leaderboard, knows you have the sheer liquidity to afford it.
The ultimate flex. I am so wealthy I can drop 50K on a 2% bonus just because I like the color blue.
However, there is a secondary, purely mathematical justification for the hyper-elite players like FFTB Hacker.
There always is with them.
When you are operating spreadsheets that measure daily production in the hundreds of millions of diamonds, a 2% permanent boost is no longer trivial. When compounded hourly over the course of a year-long campaign, that 2% aggregation of marginal gains eventually pays for the initial cost of the skin and then becomes pure, uncatchable profit. In the absolute top tier, a 2% differential is the razor-thin margin between first and second place.
It's the aggregation of marginal gains applied to digital moon-based whales. It's a wildly specific microeconomy. But everything we have unpacked so far, the grueling mansion grind, the complex probability math of the 1x click, the Veblen good moon bases, this is Main City as it exists today.
Right, the current meta.
The final section of the broadcast takes a hard pivot into the future.
And this is where the stability of the entire ecosystem comes into question. The broadcast analyzed Dev Diary number 3, detailing the developer's upcoming structural changes. And it appears the game is preparing to introduce mechanics that might completely upend the established meta.
The biggest disruption on the horizon is the introduction of the Expedition meta. This isn't just a small patch. It is an entirely new, foundational game mode that fundamentally shifts the core gameplay loop away from aggressive, rapid-fire attacking and towards long-term, passive resource deployment.
Analyzing the UI screenshots provided in the Dev Diary, we can see the scope of this change. Players will no longer just be clicking upgrade buttons within the confines of their own cities. They will be taking the NFTs they've hoarded, those loaded lions and crazy monsters, and physically deploying them out onto a broader, global map to complete specific missions.
And these missions sound intense. The Dev Diary outlines categories like brutal boss fights, high-yield resource gathering, and deep space exploration. But there is a massive catch. The developers are implementing strict gear checks,
Which acts as a massive new utility sink for the game's economy. You cannot simply send your highest-level avatar to punch a boss and expect a reward. The missions will require highly specific contextual loadouts.
Right. You might have a hyper-level dark lion that can destroy a city, but if the expedition is in a specific terrain, the game demands that you own the correct regional tents, the exact right tactical shovels, and specific capacity backpacks.
It's extremely granular.
If you don't hold those precise NFTs in your wallet, your avatar fails the mission and comes home with nothing. It forces the player base to entirely diversify their portfolios. You can't just be an arms dealer anymore. Now you have to run a digital camping supply store.
It creates entirely new secondary markets. But the most alarming detail revealed in the UI screenshots was the timescale of these expeditions. The broadcasters loaded a single mission timer displaying a travel time of over 3 hours, followed by a mission duration of 3.5 hours.
That is nearly a 7-hour real-world commitment where your premium avatar is completely locked in, taken off the board, doing absolutely nothing but traveling across a digital map.
And this staggering time delay ties directly into the most controversial new economic mechanic, Land Utility 2.0. This update completely rewrites the financial incentive of owning digital real estate within the game.
This part is fascinating. Previously, if you bought a plot of land, it just acted as a passive generator. It slowly printed diamonds. But Land Utility 2.0 introduces a literal hard-coded tax system based on geographic coordinates.
Exactly. Every plot of land in the game has a specific coordinate identifier. For example, land plot number 116/8. Under the new system, if another player decides to launch one of these 7-hour boss fight expeditions and the game's algorithm happens to spawn that boss on your specific plot of land, you automatically receive a direct percentage cut of the loot they earn.
They do all the work, they buy the shovels, they lock up their avatar for 7 hours, and you get a tax dividend simply because they stepped on your digital grass.
It solidifies a new, deeply entrenched class of passive income. The rarer and more centrally located your land NFTs are, the fatter your automatic cut of the global player base's activity becomes.
This is wild to think about.
Very. And alongside this massive economic shift, the developers are also deploying some long overdue quality of life updates for the top tier
Yes, the
optimizers.
broadcasters were practically weeping with joy over the UI fixes. They are finally updating the interface to clearly display competition multipliers in real time. But the biggest sigh of relief was the inbox fix.
A seemingly minor technical change with massive strategic implications. Previously, when a weekly competition concluded, the game's code forcefully delivered your reward payouts instantly, popping up on screen and interrupting whatever complex tasks you were executing.
Which is a nightmare if you were in the middle of executing a 150% aerial bombardment hack.
Exactly.
But now, they have implemented a manual inbox system. Players can leave their massive rewards sitting safely in an inbox, meticulously stack their attack multipliers to the absolute ceiling, and then manually claim the loot, applying the maximum possible mathematical multiplier to their winnings.
It demonstrates that the developers are keenly aware of their hyper-optimizing player base and are actively building tools to support decimal point efficiency.
For sure.
However, while the mathematicians might be happy with the inbox fix, the introduction of the expedition mechanics raised a massive existential red flag for the broadcasters themselves. It introduces what we can call the streamer dilemma.
This is the absolute crux of the issue for the long-term survival of the game.
Mm.
The broadcasters are looking at these 7-hour travel timers.
Uh-huh.
They're looking at the entirely passive nature of sending an avatar away into the void, and they are terrified.
It's bad for business.
Because from a content creation standpoint, it sounds like watching paint dry. But it's worse. You don't even get to see the paint. You just click a deploy button, a timer starts, and you stare at a static screen.
The lifeblood of modern, decentralized gaming ecosystems is constant, engaging content creation. Twitch streams, YouTube strategy guides, live reaction videos on social media. This is the funnel that drives new user acquisition. It brings fresh capital into the economy. If the core gameplay loop transitions from high-speed, aggressive market trading into clicking a button and waiting 7 hours for a text-based result, how do you broadcast that? What is the audience supposed to be watching?
Exactly. If the community cannot stream this game effectively, doesn't that fundamentally kill the hype engine? A crypto game without an engaged audience is a game that stops growing, and an economy that stops growing eventually collapses under its own weight.
It's a real danger.
You cannot make a viral highlight reel out of an avatar walking in an unseen straight line for 4 hours. The broadcasters in the Dev Diary review were practically begging the development team to add some sort of active, skill-based mini-game to the expeditions. Maybe manually dodging attacks or physically fighting the boss, just to give them something visually dynamic to put on a screen.
It highlights a profound friction at the heart of blockchain development. There is a constant tug-of-war between building a mathematically sound, tamper-proof economic simulation and building an entertaining, visually stimulating video game.
It's hard to do both.
It is. The developers are clearly leaning heavily into the simulation aspect, focusing on deer checks, supply chains, travel logistics, and land taxes. But in doing so, they risk completely alienating the evangelists and content creators who are responsible for bringing new liquidity into the system.
It is a massive gamble on the future of the platform. So, bringing this entire deep dive back to the big picture, we have unpacked the chaos of the Bunny Hop Blitz. We have dissected the terrifying, emotionless mind of FFTB Hacker, a player who casually burns 240 million diamonds on quality 6 attempts while acting as a digital arms dealer to his own enemies.
Yeah, that's still so crazy to me.
We've looked at the massive real-world capital tied up in invisible ghosts and moon-based skins just for a 2% compounded advantage.
And what becomes abundantly clear is that surviving, let alone dominating in this ecosystem, requires a highly unique skill set. It is not about reflexes. It requires a flawless intersection of deep, predictive mathematical modeling, a rigid, almost punishing dedication to time management built around uncompromising offline collection windows, and the sheer audacity to risk heavy capital on highly speculative digital assets.
It is exactly as we defined it at the start. Running a Fortune 500 manufacturing firm while playing 3D chess in a Shark Tank. But as we look toward this new horizon, toward the Dev Diary updates with Land Utility 2.0 and the 7-hour expedition timers, I want to leave you listening with a final, slightly unsettling thought to ponder.
The inevitable evolution of this specific digital economy.
Exactly. If this new land utility system means that early landowners get a permanent tax dividend just for existing, just because the algorithm decided a boss spawned on their specific coordinates, are we witnessing the intentional creation of a digital feudal system?
A literal rent-seeking economy.
Think about the trajectory here. Eventually, The wealthiest players, the ones who bought up all the prime rare land during the Genesis phase, won't even need to grind the mansion anymore. They won't need to risk 240 million diamonds merging businesses.
They won't have to do the 1x clicks.
No, they won't need to meticulously calculate attack bonuses. They will just sit back in their impenetrable digital castles and passively collect taxes from the newer lower-tier players who are forced out into the wilderness to do the grueling 7-hour expeditions just to survive. Is the ultimate hidden goal of high-stakes crypto gaming simply to become so unfathomably wealthy that you are finally allowed to stop playing the game altogether?